All right, y'all. Praise God. Praise the Lord. Theo Vaughn, comedian, podcaster, very popular comedian, podcaster. He had Jordan Peterson, who was also a very popular podcaster. And is he a therapist? I don't know, something like that. Anyway, they had a conversation just yesterday. I have not watched the full podcast yet. I may or may not. I don't know. But these clips that I've seen coming out have actually been pretty interesting. They talked about God, false gods. They talked about the book of Job. They just had some conversations around, different biblical themes that I found to be extremely interesting. So I got some clips. Let's watch some of these clips. I'm going to react to some of these clips with y'all. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. All right, let's get right into it. Oh, also, they might be doing, some cussing and stuff like that. I just want to let y'all know up front. All right. So just so y'all know, it might be some language in here. All right, let's get into it.
And do you feel like we've kind of become more godless over time?
No, I just think we started worshiping false gods. I don't think you can be godless the same way you can't be aimless. Like, look, if you're aimless, you know the old saying, the devil finds work for idle hands.
Oh, yeah.
If you're aimless, something will come for you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You'll be at a whim of whatever.
That's
if you don't have,
Okay,
if you're not blowing into your sails, then something else will.
That's for sure. So that's the crucial issue is that, people say, well, you don't have to orient yourself towards anything transcendent. Nothing transcendent exists. It's like, yeah, okay. Dispense with that. See what comes along to fill it. And people will say, well, the self does. It's now the self. It's like, no, it's not. It's the lowest possible whims of the self, right? You think, well, I should be able to do what I want whenever I want. It's like, what I are you referring to exactly here? So you mean if you get angry, you should let that possess you and you should stomp around, eh? That's the war god, Mars. So that's your god now, or Venus, right? Lust, for example.
Then you'd be looking at pornography. I think maybe we've got some really bad gods right now.
Yes, that's definitely the case. The biblical corpus is a very strange collection of stories because it tells a bunch of different pictures about God. And then it says, or it shows a bunch of different pictures of God. And then it says, those are unified. There's something at the top. This is so cool. I'm writing a new book called We Who Wrestle with God, and it's an explanation of this. Oh gosh,
tag me into the ring, dude.
Hey man, it's coming along. It'll be out in March. So here's how the story works. It's so cool. It's so ridiculously cool. So it's a set of narrative propositions about the highest unifying spirit. Okay. So in the story of Noah, so this is a definition of God. This is the thing to understand. If you're a wise person and you're a good person, so that's Noah, there will be times when you have an intuition that tells you that you better prepare because bad times are coming. Okay. If you've been clear-headed and far-seeing, if you've conducted yourself properly, that's a spirit you should attend to. It might be that survival itself depends on it. That intuition, that's God. This is definition. That's what God is. Okay. So
that's what Noah said.
That's what the story of Noah means.
Yes.
Okay. But that doesn't,
because he got the intuition that the flood was coming.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And the story insists that he was a wise man. So he's no fool who's running around thinking the sky is falling. Yeah. He's like a wise man looking forward and saying, look, trouble's coming. Yeah. Prepare.
He's locked in. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Next story is the story of the Tower of Babel. Okay. So what happens in the Tower of Babel is that men decide to build these, they're called ziggurats, and a ziggurat is a building stretching to heaven. Okay. It's a 7-tiered representation of heaven. And the emperors in the area of that time, including the Babylonian Empire, would build these extremely high ziggurats, buildings, to show that they were the top god. But they weren't God. And so they're false idols. They're false pyramids. They're attempts to stretch up to heaven based on the wrong principle. And God in that story...
You can't use construction to get there.
Well, Stalin wasn't God. Right. And neither was Mao. And they built very large pyramids that were very unstable, and they collapsed and killed everyone. Right. And so God in that story is the spirit that punishes those who build false pyramids. Right. That there's something that should be at the top. And if you don't put the proper thing at the top, you'll build a false ideology, a false structure, and everything will come tumbling down. What's so cool in that story, this is so cool. When people strive improperly toward heaven, and they do that according to the wrong principles, they end up unable to communicate with each other. And that's what's happening in our culture. You see, we can't even agree on what a woman is. And I'm not making a joke about this.
Yeah, no, it's tough.
Yeah. So that means because we've been erecting false pyramids, we've fractured so badly, we can't agree on what the basic elements of reality are. Yeah.
And does that usually correct itself, or what happens? Like, cause we've never been in this time where we have this like reflective, like.
Two things always happen.
Okay.
Either God decides that he's had enough and everything goes, or everybody covers themselves in sackcloth and ashes and repents and reorients themselves, in which case things regenerate and they move on. That's the standard story.
What do you think is going to happen?
Depends on how. See, what happens in the Exodus story, it's a real good example of this, is that the Pharaoh has put himself on a false pedestal. And the consequence of that is that worse and worse things start to happen to Egypt. That's the sequence of plagues. And each plague gets a little worse. Well, that's what happens, is that things will just get worse in waves of crisis until we admit to our error and reorient ourselves appropriately. And that can be, so what happens in the Exodus plagues is that, first of all, the whole world comes undone, and then the future is destroyed. That's the last plague. Wow, that's the death of the firstborn. Wow. Yeah.
And do you...
Well, ultimately, God's going to come back. That's what's going to happen. Because like he said, things are going to get progressively worse, which is what the Bible predicts is going to happen. Things are going to get progressively worse. And then when the time is right, Jesus is going to return. I find it very interesting in the beginning of the conversation. And I have another clip right here I want to show y'all as well. In the beginning of the conversation, they were talking about the need to serve God. And some of us serve Jesus. Some of us serve the true living God, right? But other people who don't believe in Jesus, they serve the gods of this world, right? And it's interesting because we all have a void and we all need God in some way, shape, or form. And you're either going to serve God or you're going to serve the devil. Some people will say, well, I'm not serving either one. I'm living for myself, right? But that is sinful in nature. If you're just simply living to please yourself, that is sinful in nature. The more that you give into your sin, the more that sin will continue to grow. And over time, as your sin continues to grow and grow and grow, that sinful nature that you've allowed to grow in your life, that's going to become your God. And that's what you're going to submit to. And that's how you're going to live your life based on whatever your sinful nature tells you to do. But yeah, like he said, we can't even agree on what a woman is. And that's the literal attack at the core of God's creation. God created man and woman. It's so simple. And now we can't even agree on that because we have people who have been worshiping and serving their sin for so long that now we can't even agree on basic truths of man and woman. What's this clip? Oh, so they're going to be talking about the book of Job, I believe. Let's check this one out.
What happens is that God has a bet with Satan, which is, a little ethically questionable, let's say.
Yeah, this could be a good time for a DraftKings ad too. I'm just joking, but that'd be funny.
Job's a good guy.
Uh-huh.
And Satan gets word of him, and he knows God's happy with him, and he goes to God, and he says, Job, that guy you think so great? I don't think he's so great. I think if you let me torture him, I can make him denounce you and lose faith. And God says, I don't think so. He's yours. And, people in their lives, sometimes they'll enter a period where all hell is breaking loose and everything seems to be conspiring against them. So these things happen. And so Job, it's like, first of all, his whole family's destroyed, then everything he owns. So that's act one. Then Satan curses him with a terrible skin disease.
Yeah, that's tough.
Right.
Tough,
and then he has to sit in the ashes, scraping himself. And then his friends come along and tell him that he must have done something wrong because otherwise the universe wouldn't be conspiring against him. So that's about as bad as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then God himself comes along and says, who are you to complain about your fate? Right. Now, if you don't think that's going to happen to you in your life, you're not very smart, because that is going to happen to you in your life. So then the question is, what the hell should you do about it? And one answer would be, well, that sucks. It's God and Satan against you. You know, you're kind of outmatched. It's completely unfair because you were good, and everything that you valued is taken away from you. So what should you do? You know, you shake your fist at the sky and raise a middle finger and say, fuck you, you know, like now I'm on the side of Cain and the devils, and I'm going to be resentful and bitter. And people might look and think, well, it's no wonder you're resentful and bitter. Like you lost your whole family. You have a terrible disease. Your friends are laughing at you. Right. So you have every reason. That isn't what happens in the story. Job decides that no matter what happens to him, and he means that, no matter what happens to him, he's going to maintain his ethical orientation and aim up. And I think that's, but then you think, look, man, forget about the religious trappings. Here's hell. Hell is when you get cancer. And then you're bitter and resentful about it, and you make your last 6 months a living fucking nightmare. Right. And so you might say, well, you've got cancer and that sucks. And no doubt it sucks. And maybe it's unfair. And probably it is. And maybe even, you know, God and Satan themselves bet against you. You're going to aim up and maintain your dignity and your integrity? Or are you going to take a bad situation and make it into every goddamn nightmare you can possibly imagine? Think, well, of course you have to aim up no matter what happens to you. And you think, well, that's not fair. It's like, well, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
And what does fair have to do with it? What's your choice? You're going to dig a deeper pit? Or are you going to have some integrity in the face of life's catastrophe? You know, and I think we know the answer to that, because when you meet people who have integrity in the face of catastrophe, you're struck with admiration for them.
Yeah.
Right. So that's your heart speaking, man. It's like, I don't know how you do it, but, you know, I can't help but
being all
plague. Wow, that's the death of the firstborn. Wow. Yeah. What?
I got another clip I want to show y'all too. You know, God's never against us, though. That's the one thing I was thinking when he said that. He said, you know, God is bidding against us and he's against us and stuff like that. I understand the essence of what he was trying to say, but, you know, God's never against us. You know, the Bible says that the righteous will have many hardships. Many hardships. It's not going to be smooth sailing. Just because you follow God doesn't mean it's going to be smooth sailing. Just because you're going through hard times doesn't mean that God is not on your side, because he is, right? And I think the more that we think that everything is going to be perfect just because we follow God, the more we're setting ourselves up to be disappointed. And that disappointment could eventually grow into resentment. And that resentment could eventually lead to you falling away from God. But if you're prepared for the hardship and you understand that in the hardship, in the testing, that your faith is being refined, then you'll have a different perspective. Because you're always going to come out of the hardship. It's never going to be night forever. At some point, the light has to shine through. You know what I'm saying? And when the light shines through, you can either say, wow, thank you, God, for allowing me to experience that with you, because he's always with you. Thank you for allowing me to grow my faith in that manner. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it sucked. Yes, it did not feel good, but I am strengthened through that situation. Or you could come out of the darkness and you could say, you know what, God, that didn't make no sense. Why would you put me through that? I did everything right. I loved you. I was faithful. I did XYZ works, right? And you still took this person away from me. You still allowed me to lose this job. You still allowed whatever hardship. And then you could have a bitter attitude towards God, but ultimately that's not going to serve you. That's going to cause you to fall away. So basically what I'm trying to say is, look, hard times are coming, right? What are they talking? The AI Bible. What's this clip about? Let's see.
I have a student, former student, he's a colleague of mine now, who's worked with large language models for years, and we've started experimenting with these sorts of things, you know, producing a virtual Nietzsche. We have a virtual King James Bible, and so you can ask the Bible any question Yeah, I know. It's very strange. It's like, I don't even know what to think about that, because the AI system, the large language.
That's pretty wild. A virtual King James Bible. That's kind of weird though. Because if you think about it, we kind of already have a virtual Bible. You have Bibles that are on the internet. You have the Bible app, for example. Those could be considered virtual Bibles. It's so interesting. And here's the thing. Here's what makes me extremely cautious when it comes to AI, specifically AI in religion. I feel like people are going to start depending on AI to help them grow their faith. We've already seen, I don't know if you've seen there was a church service. I think it was in Germany. The entire church service was ran by an AI. So essentially they had a screen on front of the stage, like a projection screen on the stage. They had this person who was not a real person, was a completely AI generated person, and everything that AI generated person was saying was just made up by computers. So this AI, this fake AI preacher, was preaching a message to real people in a church. And their justification as to why the church did that was essentially because it was a more streamlined process. It was just easier. They didn't have to prepare a sermon. They didn't have to take time to study themselves. They just had to say, hey, ChatGPT, create a sermon based on, whatever topic. And it preached the sermon. But the thing about it is, we don't need technology in order to connect with God. God is a relational God. That's such the incredible part about Jesus, is that Jesus is a relational God. He wants to have a relationship with you. God wants to have a relationship with his children. You're his child. I don't know how many of y'all are parents, but if you're a parent, then you understand how beautiful it is to have the privilege, because to be a parent is a privilege. It's a privilege and it's a blessing. You understand how beautiful that blessing and that privilege is, to be able to build a relationship with your child. Even when they are disobedient, even when they don't do the things that you want them to do, even when they fall short, even when their room is messy, right? And they're crying and they're peeing on themselves and stuff like that. Even through all of that, you can still recognize how beautiful it is to be able to build a loving relationship with your child. Now, if we can recognize that as humans, if we can recognize how valuable and how much of a privilege it is to be able to build a relationship with our children, how much more do you think God understands that? How much more? And what I'm trying to say is, we don't need to rely on technology. Yes, we need to know the Bible. Read the Bible. Read the scriptures and ask God for understanding yourself. And yes, there's a place for you to, fellowship and see a pastor and, seek other opinions into different theological, questions that you might have. But you need to work on developing a relationship with God for yourself, because there's some Christians who say that they believe in Jesus, who are still struggling to develop a genuine relationship with him. They believe that Jesus died and rose again. They have their faith and belief in Jesus, but there's still a disconnect when it comes to the relationship aspect, because there's some people, and I'm going off on a tangent. Those of y'all who want to stay and listen, then stay and listen. I have another clip to show y'all, but I just want to say this. Some people find it a struggle to build a relationship with a person who is not physically there. Jesus is with us in spirit. It's not like Jesus is here physically in the flesh as he once was. Jesus is here with us in spirit, right? But some people struggle with the idea of building a relationship if it's not attached to a physical body. But I would tell you that the relationship that we have the opportunity to build with our Father in heaven spiritually is way deeper than any physical relationship that we could build here on this earth. But you just have to take the time to have faith, to trust that, and also ask God to help you draw closer to him. Ask God to cleanse your heart, to rid you of any impurities that may not please him, so that you could have the ability, a clean heart, to draw closer to him genuinely. I don't know how I got off on that, but I just thought I should say that. Let's continue.
Language model does capture the spirit of a text. And there's a lot of biblical text. Mm-hmm. And now if you have a system that speaks, what voice is a system that speaks in the voice of the Bible? What the hell voice is that?
Hey, boys.
It's, yeah, well,
no, I don't know if that would be it.
Yeah, well,
that sounds almost like a...
That's an interesting question. Like, what voice... that's the thing. If you plug in the Bible into like a chat GPT, and you're learning the Bible through artificial intelligence, what voice are you learning the Bible from? It's not the voice of God. But then you think about it and it's like, well, if this AI model is true to the integrity of preserving the text, and it's teaching the text as they were written, I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I don't even know how to begin to kind of wrap my mind around that. Let's watch this clip right here.
I have a tough time feeling proud of myself.
yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to think about that with you for a couple minutes. Yeah, I just have a really tough time feeling people are always like, you should feel proud of yourself, and it's really tough for me to do that.
Well, pride is a cardinal sin, and there's a reason for that. And there's a reason that pride goes before a fall. And I don't think you should be proud of yourself. I don't think that's the right terminology.
Okay.
And I think that's a place where our culture has really fallen off the rails. It's like, you should be convinced in your heart that you're doing the best you can with what you've been given, right? And hopefully that'll make you less anxious and it'll make you more hopeful. But, you should have the same kind of regard for yourself that you have for someone that you love. And that's not pride. It would be lovely if you could orient your thoughts to yourself so that you could allow yourself to be pleased if you thrived. It's not pride. It's
okay,
a recognition
say it again.
of,
it would be nice if I
could orient yourself to yourself so you would be pleased if you thrive. Do you imagine you have a son? Mm-hmm. You want your son to do well.
Oh, yeah, I already want him to do well, and he doesn't even exist.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, that's the attitude you should have towards yourself, too, is that, you should also strive. Look, if your son goes out and plays a soccer game, you want him to do well. You don't want him to be arrogant and prideful, and you don't want him to be the star at everyone else's expense.
Yeah.
You want him to do well when he deserves to do well, and you want him to deserve to do well. Mm. Well, that's the attitude you should have towards yourself. It's like you should set yourself up so that if things are good for you, that's good. Mm. Now, you should be grateful about that, right? And you should be amazed that it's happening, given how many things can go wrong. You should allow yourself the luxury of success, right? But then you should also hope for that for everyone else. It's like, well, we could set up the world so that we had life more abundant, and everyone was successful. And we should treat ourselves as if we're the sorts of creatures for whom success is acceptable, right? And we do have doubts about that because we're flawed deeply, we're mortal and we're vulnerable and we're subject to suffering and we're ignorant and we make mistakes. And it's easy to think that a creature like that deserves nothing but, say, unending punishment and misery, but I think you give yourself the benefit of the doubt, like you do someone you love. And if success comes along, you say, well, I'm so grateful for this, and I hope I can take the opportunity to make proper use of it. And you let yourself, you're not obligated to torture yourself beyond whatever is necessary to help you learn. Mm. Right. And if you can drop that and you can accept, it's also the case, look, man, you're going to have rough times. They're coming. Mm-hmm. They're always coming. And if you're having a okay time now, then you think, okay, I'll just use this to recuperate, and I'll use it advantageously, and I'll accept it in good graces without thinking that somehow I'm special and deserve it. Mm. But gratitude's an excellent practice, man. Yeah. It's the opposite of arrogance and resentment. I think it's a great thing to become an expert at. And I think that you can allow yourself happiness if you're grateful.
There's something in, thank you for that. Thanks for the.
I think that was a good message. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to be like, quote unquote, proud of the success that you have experienced in your life. But I think your priorities have to be straight. Your priority has to be that God is the number one priority in your life. And if it wasn't for God, you wouldn't have any success. And I think the mind frame has to be, wow, I'm proud of how far God has taken me and transformed my life. Because I know if it wasn't for him, then none of this would be possible. I think that has to be the mindset, as opposed to just being proud in your ability to do XYZ that contributed to your success. Does that make sense? Because I think as humans, it's easy for us to fall into the perspective of, I did this, I worked hard, I stayed up late, I came up with these ideas, I ran the sales meeting and I closed this deal and I built this business and I, got this job and I went to college and I did this and that. And that's why I'm successful. I think it's easy for us to fall into that pride. And the world wants you to, and the world encourages you to go down that route. But ultimately, the more you go down that route and that perspective, the further that pulls you away from God. And if it wasn't for God breathing air into your lungs, we would literally be dirt. We would literally be dirt. And I think that's the perspective that is a little more healthy, in my opinion. Let me know what y'all think about this video. Man, why y'all ain't tell me my shirt was all messed up? All right, y'all, I'm out.